Our Unitarian Universalist tradition speaks of 7 principles which we affirm and promote, the first of which is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. But our tradition also names 6 sources which ground the tradition, which ground our faith, sources which provide guidance for us and serve as wisdom in our lives. We hear them now as our second reading. Unitarian Universalism draws from many sources: direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. Words and deeds of prophetic women and men which challenge us to confront the powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual lives. Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. Spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Today we consider together the first source, direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. In a course I took recently in Chicago as part of my graduate studies, Professor David Bartlett asked each of us to introduce ourselves to the class by describing the ministry context in which each of us work. Tell us a little about the culture, both of the larger community and of your particular congregation. Who are the members of your congregation, and why do they come? And more importantly for this course, who are your typical visitors, and what are they looking for? The program is focused on preaching and brings ministers from different cultures, currently all over the U.S. and Canada, but also New Zealand, Australia, India, Sweden, and Germany. So we had a lot of different answers to those questions. Dr. Bartlett's course was called Preaching Apologetics. This is not apologetics as in, mea culpa, I've done wrong, please forgive me. Rather, it's apologetics in the classical Greek sense, from the word apologia. In the ancient Greek legal system, the prosecutor delivers the categoria, the accusation, the charge. The defendant replies with an apologia, an explanation, a rebuttal of the charges, a defense, as in the case of Socrates' defense. Religious apologetics, then, seeks to defend one's faith, to demonstrate that it is reasonable, rational. To preach apologetically is to explain the faith, to rebut charges brought by critics, to articulate and defend one's own understanding. The course syllabus stated, this course will consider how we can preach faithfully and effectively to sympathetic visitors. One presupposition of the course is that the line between belief and unbelief runs right through the heart of the congregation, and even through the consciousness of the congregant or preacher. You think? I think. Who are the members of your congregation, and why do they come? Who are your typical visitors, and what are they looking for? My colleague Tracy is a Lutheran minister in San Antonio. It's an affluent suburban congregation. Tracy told us that in South Texas, the overwhelming majority of people are religiously affiliated. Many of my members come, she said, because that's what you do on Sunday morning. My challenge is to really engage them, to help them question, to deepen their faith and their curiosity. Visitors? Probably some folks who are church shopping, but otherwise they're probably relatives visiting from out of town. You know, you go to church on Sunday morning in South Texas. Now, my colleague Karen is an Anglican priest in Montreal. It's a small urban parish. Karen told us that in Montreal, nearly 95% of the population has no religious affiliation at all. My members don't wake up thinking, I should go to church today. They choose to come in the face of huge cultural pressure against doing so. In fact, some of my folks come up the side street, she said, and sneak in the back door so that they won't be seen. Our visitors, she said, are definitely not people who feel obligated to be here. They usually come with questions. They're searching for a sense of purpose or meaning in their lives. Perhaps they've had a recent spiritual experience and they want to have someone to talk to about it. They wonder what it means. As a general rule, our visitors are seekers. Direct experience of mystery and wonder, we say, is one of our sources. It's not much of a surprise that of all the sources of the UU tradition, direct experience is named first. In our Pathway to Membership class, the final step is the Saturday evening potluck, always a delightful meal, after which each new member tells a bit about their spiritual autobiography. The paths that have brought us to this place are incredibly varied. In my class, I believe there were 23. Some of us having left traditions which no longer worked for us. Others exploring organized religion for the very first time. Some are rediscovering and exploring a faith of our early years in fresh, new ways. Some of us are in between, clearly setting some things down, but not entirely sure that we can say what's left, or whether some new thing is developing, whether we're picking anything up. Some of us have all but rejected religion, and yet we find meaning and relationship, community here in this congregation. Others of us are working through religious baggage that still weighs us down. I don't suppose anyone out here is in that category. I'm probably in 3 of these categories at once. Whatever our path, we use honor direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder. The challenge we have is how to talk about something which by its very definition is mystery. We don't begin at the same place. We don't all use the same language. We certainly don't have a text in common to which we turn as a source of authority. I suspect most of us are quite articulate about what we don't believe. The news is replete with expressions of religion that are repugnant, if not downright silly. But can we say what is important to us? Can we articulate our faith as Reverend Susan was encouraging us last week? This past May, we had our coming of age graduation service for last year's coming of age class. Each young person stood in this place and was introduced by his or her mentor, and then spoke with us about their own spiritual path and current understanding. It was a very moving service. Several of these young folks, 13 years old, mind you, spoke of the significance of music in their lives. And it strikes me upon reflection that in a way, music might serve as a wonderful metaphor for the spiritual experience in life. One of the youth, Catherine, writes, "Music is another thing that gives me strength in sadness, that shows me a secure footing when the path is muddy. The music that I play gives me an outlet to express my feelings," she said. Music is very important to me, but it's hard to describe to you because to me, music describes itself. Isn't that interesting? And in some ways, an expression of our spiritual experience as well. We wrestle to find words to articulate some of the experiences we've had spiritually. Ryan writes, "To me, music is a spiritual practice. It is so gratifying to play and listen and make music. To me, music is something that truly binds us together as a race. Nothing that separates us can take away our mutual love of music. The feelings that music arises in us all are things that we can relate to. It can take us to the depths of despair or the heights of joy and anywhere in between. Music, he writes, is the perfect example of something we divide ourselves with, where it really is one of those things we have in common. He might have said, our experiences of mystery and wonder are a perfect example of things we divide ourselves with, when really it's one of those things we have in common. If you've been to the Musical Instrument Museum, you'll see that music is something that we have in common. I spent 6 hours there one day with my friend Kathy, and I think we got through 2 continents. Musical instruments made of leaves, of bamboo, of half-used oil barrels, of human bones, of pretty much whatever it is that people had in their place. The music wells up out of us, whatever our culture, whatever our tradition, and we make music not the same, but beautiful music nonetheless. Reed writes, when I think about my talents, it all revolves around music. Music keeps me alive. I wouldn't say I'm the best at playing any instrument, but when it comes to writing music, there is no one else who can do what I do. No one. Another person can make their own music, but they can never make mine. In a sense, that's a metaphor for the spiritual life as well. We all have a responsibility for nurturing a faith, nurturing a spiritual way of life. So why then do we come here this morning? What are you looking for? I suspect on some level we know that our direct experience, powerful as it may be, is not enough. Our culture emphasizes my experience above all else. We prize independence. In fact, we begin to think that we truly are independent. We don't need to be bound by religion, by creed, by community. The common phrase, I'm spiritual but not religious, which I've used myself at times, could be a banner for this frame of mind. We're independent. I'm spiritual. I'm not religious. In a recent edition of Image magazine, author Gregory Wolfe writes an article titled, Religious but Not Spiritual. He writes that many associate the word religious with fanaticism, irrationality, intolerance, and closed-mindedness, while spirituality suggests something more detached, thoughtful, tolerant, and open. And yet, Wolfe contends, there is an irony at work here when one realizes that these spiritual individualists, inheritors of an I culture, most often pluck items off the shelf that we call a we culture. Spiritual tourism, if you will, offers the benefits of wisdom derived from those who submit to authority and discipline and tradition without having to do so oneself. Does that ring true at all in your own life? Unitarian Universalist theologian James Luther Adams argues that to many people the term faith often signifies the acceptance of something that puts a strain on the intelligence. Faith is to them a belief in what is not true, or in what by nature not, or in what is by nature not fact, but wish. To others, the word faith signifies the acceptance of some belief simply because a church or a tradition, a state, or a party demands it. But we know that organized religion has no monopoly on the concept of faith. Every day, the culture in which you and I are steeped invites us to place our faith in that which it values. We may not be bound by a faith or a creed in any traditional sense, but we are nonetheless steeped in a cultural faith, if you will. It's a faith which defines, for example, beauty for us. It defines success. It's a faith that often values people based on their level of education or their apparent intelligence. It's a faith which expresses itself by detailing the latest economic data at the top of the hour, for hour after hour after hour, day after day, week after week, instilling in us the faith that the economic data is what is most important in our lives. In Adam's words, human history is not a struggle between religion and irreligion. It is veritably a battle of faith, a battle of the gods who claim our allegiance. So, why are you here today? Only you can say, but I wonder if on some level we come because we hunger for depth. We long for intentional spiritual experiences. Perhaps, as Gregory Wolfe puts it, we are tired of being spiritual tourists who have no home to return to. Spiritual tourists are always restlessly consuming new experiences. They can't eat, pray, and love enough. We all come for our own reasons. But I suspect that we know the simple act of sharing our individual spiritual experiences brings greater understanding of them. We know that our understanding is incomplete. And so we choose to place ourselves in weekly situations where direct experience of mystery and wonder is valued, is held central to life. We come here to grow a faith, to develop a way of listening and seeing life. When a physician is learning how to use a stethoscope to determine the health and normal functioning of the heart, they have to learn what to listen for. They don't just wake up one day and have the ability to hear all the different types of heart murmurs, for example. They intentionally develop a discipline of listening, and they're open to the wisdom of experienced physicians who help them understand what to listen for. And over time, they develop the ability to hear that which we medical layfolks, most of us, cannot hear. We cannot discern the sounds. In T.S. Eliot's poem, Four Quartets, there is an intriguing line that says, "We had the experience, but missed the meaning." We had the experience, but missed the meaning. Our individual spiritual experiences are incredibly respected and valued in this faith tradition, and for that we are all thankful. But it is possible to have the spiritual experience and miss the meaning. I submit that that's why many of us are here today. We come because we need help in listening. We need help in seeing life in a particular way, in hearing for the sound of the sacred, that transcending mystery and wonder that we have difficulty talking about. We're independent souls, yes, but at the end of the day, we find greater meaning here in relationship, in community, where we learn together to listen. Each of us bringing a glimmer of light, but none of us having the whole. Some of us understand the words transcending mystery and wonder in historic terms. Some of us use God to describe that experience. Some of us think of that mystery and wonder as the life force, or the web of existence, or the emerging consciousness, or energy, or faith, or love, or nature. We all use different language, but we're trying to get to the same thing. And when I listen to your explanation, I gather some light from your glimmer of light. And hopefully, if you listen to me a bit, you'll gather at least a tiny glimmer of light spiritual autobiography, which I'll read. As a young child, McLennan writes, I thought of God as a magical, all-powerful being who was responsible for everything that happened, good or bad. Later in childhood, I began to feel I had a cause and effect relationship with God, gaining some control over good and bad results by how I prayed, petitioned, and behaved. Then, in my teenage years, God became personalized for me as the ideal parent, unconditionally accepting and loving. By the time I was in my 20s, McLennan writes, God had become an impersonal force or energy in the universe. He writes, I still resonate most closely with William Wordsworth's way of describing God in Tintern Abbey. A sense of sublime, of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and the mind of humanity, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. McLennan continues, yet in my 50s, I've also begun to pray to God as a person again, especially in times of great need and great joy. I do that even as I know God intellectually to be an impersonal life force. So, he writes, I live in paradox and ambiguity with God now, often simply feeling overcome with awe as Spirit fills me from some source far beyond my own conscious control. Friends, we are here today, each bringing our own glimmer of light, our own perspective into the truth, so that we might join those glimmers of light into a great beacon of hope and faith and commitment, so that we might join those glimmers together into a great, free, and open-spirited community of faith. May it be so.
Each week we take an offering to sustain and strengthen the ministry of this congregation. I invite you to read with me the words of dedication for our offering. They are printed in your order of service.